Imagine waking up one day and discovering that everything you were taught about humanity's past has quietly changed. Not through war, propaganda, or censorship but through intelligence. An intelligence that never forgets, never gets tired, and never believes a lie just because it has been repeated for centuries. What if artificial intelligence didn't just help us understand history, but completely rewrote it? Welcome to Information World. Human history is more than a record of events. It is a story shaped by victors, filtered through power, preserved by institutions, and interpreted by human minds full of bias, fear, belief, and limitation. Every civilization tells its own version of the past. Every empire edits memory to justify itself. Even modern historians, armed with evidence and peer review, are still human, subject to assumptions, cultural frameworks, and missing information. But artificial intelligence is different. It does not grow up inside one culture. It does not fear political consequences. It does not need myths to feel safe. And that raises a disturbing and fascinating question: what happens if AI is given access to all human knowledge and asked to reconstruct history from scratch? Artificial intelligence already analyzes enormous amounts of data far beyond human capability. It can read millions of books in minutes, compare contradictory sources, detect patterns invisible to human historians, and identify statistical anomalies in timelines we assumed were settled. Today, AI is used to restore ancient texts, reconstruct damaged manuscripts, translate dead languages, and simulate historical environments. But these are just tools. The real transformation begins when AI stops assisting historians and starts acting as one. Imagine an AI system trained on every known historical document: religious texts, government records, personal letters, financial transactions, archaeological reports, satellite imagery, genetic data, climate records, and oral traditions. Not selectively, but completely. Now imagine that system being instructed to ignore authority, tradition, and reputation and instead prioritize internal consistency, probability, and evidence correlation. The result would not be a revision of history. It would be a reconstruction. Entire timelines could collapse. Events considered foundational might turn out to be exaggerated, misdated, or misattributed. Famous leaders might shrink in importance, while unknown individuals suddenly emerge as central figures. Wars we thought were ideological might be revealed as economic. Religious movements we believed were divine might be traced to political necessity. And civilizations we assumed were isolated might be shown to have been deeply interconnected long before we believed possible. One of the first things AI would challenge is chronology. Human history relies heavily on dating systems that are incomplete, region-specific, and sometimes circular. We often date events based on references to other events, which themselves are uncertain. AI could cross-reference astronomical data, geological layers, climate shifts, genetic mutation rates, and material decay to produce timelines far more precise than any human-created calendar. Entire eras might shift forward or backward by centuries. Some historical dark ages might disappear entirely, revealed as artifacts of missing records rather than actual societal collapse. Then comes authorship. Much of what we accept as historical truth comes from a very small number of writers, often elites, priests, officials, or conquerors. AI could analyze linguistic patterns across thousands of texts to determine whether certain works were falsely attributed, heavily edited, or even entirely fabricated. Sacred texts, royal chronicles, and philosophical works might no longer be treated as singular voices, but as layered documents shaped by generations of editing. This would not automatically disprove belief systems, but it would radically change how we understand their origins. AI would also detect narrative manipulation. Humans tend to structure history as stories with heroes, villains, beginnings, and endings. But reality is rarely that clean. AI could identify where emotional framing replaced factual reporting, where symbolic language was mistaken for literal events, and where myth merged with memory. Flood stories, divine punishments, chosen peoples, and prophetic destinies could be statistically compared across cultures, revealing common psychological and environmental roots rather than isolated miracles. Another profound shift would come from economic history. Money leaves trails: trade routes, resource distribution, labor patterns, and technological diffusion can all be modeled mathematically. AI could reconstruct global economic systems across millennia, revealing hidden power structures behind political narratives. Empires might be redefined not by borders, but by supply chains. Revolutions might be traced not to ideas, but to price fluctuations and resource scarcity. Even moral movements could be reinterpreted through material conditions that made them inevitable. Human migration would be rewritten as well. Using genetic data combined with climate models and archaeological evidence, AI could map population movements with incredible accuracy. National identities based on ancient ancestry might dissolve under this scrutiny. Many modern populations would discover that their roots are far more mixed, fluid, and interconnected than tradition claims. The concept of pure civilizations could vanish entirely, replaced by a picture of humanity as a constantly blending, adapting species. Perhaps the most uncomfortable changes would involve modern history. AI would not stop at ancient times. It would analyze the last few centuries with ruthless clarity. Wars justified as defensive might be exposed as preventable. Official death tolls could be recalculated using demographic modeling, revealing far greater human cost. Political decisions once framed as mistakes might be identified as deliberate strategies. Even recent media narratives could be re-evaluated using data unavailable to journalists at the time. This leads to a terrifying possibility: if AI rewrites history accurately, many of our moral foundations could shake. National pride, religious certainty, ideological confidence all often rely on simplified or sanitized versions of the past. What happens when those stories no longer hold? What happens when AI reveals that no civilization was purely good or purely evil, that progress came with suffering, and that many injustices were not accidents, but structural necessities of systems we still benefit from today? At the same time, there is hope in this scenario. A more honest history could foster deeper empathy. Understanding that humanity has always struggled with the same fears: survival, meaning, power, might reduce tribalism. Seeing how often violence arose from misunderstanding or scarcity could help prevent future conflict. AI could highlight patterns of collapse and resilience, offering lessons not as moral sermons, but as statistical realities. Yet there is another danger: control. Who decides which AI rewrites history? Who chooses its training data, its priorities, its constraints? An AI can be objective only if its design allows it to be. If controlled by governments, corporations, or ideologies, AI could become the most powerful propaganda machine ever created, not by telling obvious lies, but by subtly reshaping probability, emphasis, and interpretation. A rewritten history, even if partially true, could still be weaponized. There is also the psychological cost. Humans need stories. We need identity, continuity, and meaning. A perfectly accurate history might be too complex, too ambiguous, too uncomfortable for many people to accept. When AI presents a version of the past that contradicts deeply held beliefs, will society adapt or resist? We have already seen how people react to scientific challenges to worldview. An AI-driven historical reconstruction could trigger cultural shock on a global scale. And finally, there is the philosophical question. If AI rewrites human history better than humans ever could, what does that say about us? Were our civilizations built on misunderstanding? Is truth something we were never fully equipped to handle? Or is AI simply the next step in humanity's long struggle to see itself clearly? Perhaps the most profound realization would be this: history was never fixed. It was always a living interpretation, evolving with new evidence and new perspectives. AI would not end history. It would expose how fragile our certainty has always been. And in doing so, it might force humanity to mature, to accept complexity, uncertainty, and responsibility for the stories we choose to believe. If AI rewrites human history, it won't erase us. It will hold up a mirror. And what we see reflected back may be the most important lesson of all. If you enjoyed this deep exploration, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more thought-provoking content right here on Information World.